All right. Well, hopefully that illustrated it for you and you found it kind of interesting to see that there are people who have this break between their visual system and then their consciousness. And they believe that they're blind, but they actually can avoid a ball being thrown at them and things like that. Kind of interesting. So it's one of those dissociations in consciousness, right? Subliminal perception is another dissociation in consciousness. So the definition of subliminal stimuli is if the stimulus is detected 50% of the time or less. So for a stimulus to be subliminal doesn't mean that it has to be, invisible or unhearable. It means that it's detected 50% of the time or less. Our absolute threshold is defined as detecting something 50% of the time or more. So that means that the thing is being presented to us at a level that we should or could detect it. But to be a subliminal stimulus, it means that we are, at less than chance. We are detecting it 50%, less than 50% of the time. So it's, 49.9% of the time or less. If you've seen Fight Club, they put in like a frame of Brad Pitt as like a foreshadowing kind of thing, but they were trying to do it in a subliminal way so that he would just flash really quickly, and a lot of people didn't notice it, until they watched the movie a second or third time. Then they would be able to pick it up. The fact that they could pick it up on the second or third viewing when they were expecting it, right? Now you kind of see that, it was presented at a level that they could have detected it, but they weren't motivated or aware, and so they didn't detect it. So it doesn't mean it has to be invisible. It doesn't mean that it's something that's unattended, right? Like this one, you need to purchase some new spectacles, but the person's just, reading the letters out loud because he's at an eye test, right? The fact that he's not noticing that it's a sentence, that's not technically a subliminal message where the optometrist is trying to convince the person that they have to buy new spectacles. That's not the same thing as a subliminal message. A subliminal message is something that, 49% of the time or less, a person would be able to detect it. So it's played quietly enough, or it's shown briefly enough or dimly enough, something like that. Subliminal messages don't really work with smell and taste because those are chemical senses that can linger. So it's really hard to do a subliminal message with that. But with sight and sound, you could do a subliminal message. So when we talk about thresholds, and I mentioned the absolute threshold a second ago, but when we talk about thresholds, we're talking about the level when a person could actually detect or report that they have experienced the stimulus. So the objective threshold is where the subject says, I don't see it and can't guess what it is. So, you've presented a stimulus, they go, I didn't see anything, and you go, well, why don't you just take a guess? If they say it was a star and it was actually, a cat, for a fact they literally didn't see it. It didn't even get into their unconsciousness. They did not, objectively, they did not detect it. The subjective threshold, the subject says, I don't see it, but they can guess what it is. So they don't think that they detected the stimulus, but their brain did detect the stimulus. Their unconscious part of their brain, their subconscious, whatever you want to call it. The awareness level, or what we call the supraliminal threshold. So if subliminal is below the level of detection, right, supraliminal is above that level of detection. Now we have a person who says they saw it and they can say what it was, right? So that's a distinction from subliminal perception. So let's get back to subliminal perception, and we can see that reaction time is slightly faster when a person is primed with a subliminal related word. So if we sort of tell them ahead of time subliminally, so either it's super quiet or it's flashed really quickly, let's say the word bark, and then let's say we played it really quietly and they have no awareness that they heard it and they couldn't guess it, so it's below their objective threshold. And then we later ask them to make an association between, let's say, dog and cat, something like that. They will actually react faster to dog and cat as like a viable pair than if they hadn't been primed with the word bark. It's possible that what's happening with these subliminal cues is that you're activating the concept. So by saying bark, they're sort of in their little neural network that includes dogs. And so they don't know that they're already in that area, but they're sort of already thinking along those lines. And so when you cue them with a dog, they're like really quick, ready, primed, able to respond really quickly. So if the prime is, I went to a wedding last weekend. So if we sort of cue with a picture of a wedding attendance, or a phrase is played really quietly, I went to a wedding last weekend, something like that. And then we give the test item is black a color? Here we have a mock-up of a neural network. They're really hard to draw. Neural networks are complicated. So I found this one on the internet and then tried to make up a prime and a test that would make sense with it. The colors are sort of all stored sort of together in this depiction of a neural network. And then you have sort of the spreading activation that might occur, which we'll talk about in another chapter, that phrase that I just used. But the idea that if you think about black as a color, the fact that you thought about the color black may spread out to the other associated colors like white and red and so on. So by activating the concept of wedding, white might much more quickly come to mind, which is tied to the concept of black. And so you may respond more quickly to black as a test probe than you would have if we hadn't talked about weddings, right? Which had evoked this concept of white. Why is white so tied to wedding? And we never think about the color of the tuxedos, which are almost always black. That's really an interesting bias, isn't it? Well, let's not think about that too hard, because not all wedding dresses are white. Not all tuxedos are black anyway, but we just have this really strong association between weddings and white. That's really an interesting one, but it is what it is. And so by priming a person to think about a wedding, you may be activating that color component, and then it spreads out to other colors and you can respond more quickly. Now, subliminal perception does not affect long-lasting things like your ultimate memory, your ability to store something. It doesn't affect people's self-esteem. There have been like subliminal programs that you could, in the old days, you could get like these cassette tapes and you could put headphones on your head and then sleep with this cassette tape that would just automatically keep playing all night long. And the idea was that it would boost your memory skills or that it would boost your self-esteem, something like that. Those don't work. That's just a sham, charlatan concept. A lot of people believe in it. So if you're one of the people who believe in it, I'm not trying to cast any aspersions. It's just, research has shown that people's behaviors, their attitudes are not affected in a long-lasting way from these things. And then one of the classic urban legends that surrounds subliminal messages is this old story that turns out that it was completely untrue, but somebody told a very complex story about how in Canada they had the actual study was done in Canada. The fake thing, the urban legend was that here in the U.S., movie theaters would embed buy Coca-Cola and buy popcorn in amongst the like the trailers. Sorry, I'm talking over my hooting owl. In case you're enjoying my Audubon clock, they would over the trailers and stuff like that. That's at the beginning of a movie before the movie starts. They would embed these messages that were supposed to drive moviegoers out into the lobby to buy Coke and popcorn. It turns out that never happened. That's just a pure urban legend. But a real study happened in Canada where they called people, this is in the olden days before cable, so there's only like 3 channels available. They called people and they said, on channel 4, they're going to be running a movie. And so if you're watching the movie, we want you to keep track of any urges that you might have while you're watching the movie, because we're going to be embedding a subliminal message. And so they were really super clear about it. Like, this is what we're doing. And so people were supposed to write down any urges that they felt. And then the researchers called them the day after the movie. And people had urges such as, buying certain kinds of drinks or food or things like that. They assumed it was going to be some kind of, marketing ploy. So they all had an urge to buy something, right? Like that was what they reported. Not a soul reported what was actually embedded in there, which was call mom. And so there's some suggestibility with regard to buying habits, the effect of subliminal messages on buying habits. But the truth is, a subliminal message is not powerful enough to cause you to like grab your car keys, put on your shoes, and go somewhere. That's for sure. It doesn't have that kind of impact. So they can do a little bit of things to prime you to be thinking in a certain way, that's for sure, but only for the moment. It can prime you to be more ready to think about a particular topic than something else, and that's about it. All right, well, that concludes chapter 2. So I will be seeing you guys in chapter 3 next.